All right, here's your S800-word expansion of key point 1 in the tone and flow you're asking for. You know, when we talk about pleasure, intimacy, connection, there's a funny thing that happens. We act like the subject is wide open, like anything can be discussed. But when it comes to certain parts of the male body, suddenly, the shutters come down. We can talk about male arousal in the most superficial way. We can joke about it. We can reference it in songs or movies. But when it comes to real, honest, detailed conversations about the full range of male pleasure, we're still living in a kind of cultural dark age. And here's the problem with that. What we don't talk about, we don't explore. What we don't explore, we don't understand. And what we don't understand, we miss out on. Think about it. How many of you have had conversations with your partner about exactly what turns them on? And I mean, exactly. Not just, I like this, or I like that, but breaking down why, where, how, in what way, and with what kind of touch. Most couples never even get close to that level of detail. And it's not because they don't want to. It's because, somewhere along the way, we picked up the idea that certain kinds of pleasure, especially for men, are either obvious and don't need discussing, or they're off limits because they make us uncomfortable. Here's the irony. Men are often portrayed as the more sexually confident gender, the ones who are supposedly simple in what they want. But the truth, many men are navigating just as much confusion, just as much uncertainty about their bodies as women do, maybe more, because they're supposed to pretend they already know everything. That act stops them from asking questions, from admitting there are things they've never tried, and from sharing when something feels good in a way they didn't expect. And that's where women, partners, lovers, friends, get left out of a whole world of possibilities. Because if a man feels he can't open up about his own pleasure without being judged, laughed at, or misunderstood, he's going to stick to the basics. He's going to stay on the surface. And intimacy is never about staying on the surface. It's not just men holding back, though. A lot of women have been conditioned to see male pleasure as a checklist of obvious moves, like there's a fixed script that works for everyone. And if that script is followed, job done. But that's like saying every woman experiences pleasure the same way. We know that's not true. So why would it be true for men? The reality is, male pleasure is far more nuanced than most people give it credit for, and the more we pretend it's simple, the more we rob ourselves of the intimacy that comes from curiosity and discovery. There's this strange cultural equation that says if you're a woman and you don't know every possible erogenous zone on a man's body, well, no big deal, you can learn. But if you're a man and you don't know those things about yourself, that's embarrassing. That's shameful. And that's the exact shame we have to dismantle. Because here's the thing. When you take the time to get curious about pleasure, when you treat it not as a one-time discovery, but as an ongoing conversation, everything changes. Relationships get deeper. Attraction stays alive longer. Trust builds because there's nothing you can't talk about. And yet, to get there, we have to start by acknowledging the elephant in the room. The fact that male pleasure is still treated as a taboo subject in its full complexity. It's not that people are prudish. They're just stuck in the old script. The script where men want sex all the time. Men are easy to please. Men don't need variety. Men don't need emotional connection to feel pleasure. All of these are lazy stereotypes that close the door on the truth. The truth is that pleasure, for men, can be every bit as layered, intricate, and emotionally connected as it is for women. It can come from places in the body that aren't talked about in locker rooms or Hollywood movies. It can involve sensations that surprise them, sometimes even confuse them at first, because no one ever told them those parts of their body could feel that way. But that starts with breaking the silence. It starts with being willing to talk about these things without shame, without smirks, without the fear of, what does this say about me? If you're a man, that means letting yourself be honest about what you've wondered about, what you've fantasized about, what you've maybe even been too embarrassed to try. If you're a woman, it means replacing assumptions with questions, replacing scripts with curiosity, and creating an environment where your partner knows there's no judgment. When that kind of trust exists, something amazing happens. People stop performing and start experiencing. They stop playing a role in the bedroom and start living the moment fully. And that's when you find out what someone really likes. Sometimes even what you really like. And I'll tell you, if you think this is just about spicing things up in the bedroom, it's not. This is about creating a relationship dynamic where exploration and honesty are the norm. Where you're not scared to bring up something new. Where trying something different isn't met with, that's weird, but with, tell me more. That mindset is the foundation for a connection that can evolve and grow instead of getting stuck in routine. Which brings us to the question I want you to carry into the rest of this conversation. If there's a whole part of male pleasure that's been hiding in plain sight, simply because we've been too awkward or too ignorant to talk about it, what are we missing out on right now? Do you want me to now expand key point 2 and in the same tone so the speech flows perfectly into the anatomy reveal? All right, here's your ESA 800-word expansion for key point 2 in the same tone and flow. So let's talk about this overlooked anatomy. And right here is where a lot of people start to squirm in their seats. The second you mention it, people either laugh, make a joke, or shut the conversation down entirely, which is interesting because if we were talking about, say, the clitoris and how misunderstood it is, everyone would be nodding along saying, yes, we need to know more about that. But bring up the equivalent in male pleasure, and suddenly there's an awkward silence. The truth is, there's a part of the male body that is incredibly powerful when it comes to pleasure, but it's almost never discussed in any serious way outside of certain circles, and yet it's not new information. It's been there since, well, forever. I'm talking about the prostate, and here's the thing, most people have heard the word before. They might know it in the context of health checks, doctors, medical exams, maybe even jokes on TV, but very few actually know its role in sexual response, or that it's often referred to as the male G-spot. And for a lot of men, the only association they have with the word is medical and uncomfortable, so no wonder they don't link it with pleasure. Anatomically, the prostate sits just below the bladder, surrounding part of the urethra. It's about the size of a walnut, but don't let its size fool you. Packed into that little gland are nerve endings and connections that can produce sensations unlike anything else. It plays a role in producing the fluid that helps carry sperm during ejaculation. But when stimulated in the right way, it can trigger deep, full body pleasure that's completely different from the sensation of stimulation on the penis alone. Now, if you've never heard this before, it might sound strange. That's because we've all been fed a very narrow definition of male pleasure, one that focuses almost exclusively on external stimulation. But imagine if someone said to women, everything you need to know about pleasure is on the outside. There's no reason to explore anything internally. That would be absurd, right? Yet, Yet that's exactly the mindset that's been applied to men for decades. Part of the reason the prostate is overlooked is that its location makes it a little less accessible. You can't just casually stumble across it by accident. It's inside, and it requires a different kind of approach. But that difference is exactly what makes it interesting, because new approaches mean new experiences. And yet, for many men, the idea of exploring it never even crosses their mind. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we made the location of the prostate into a cultural no-go zone for straight men. There's an instant wall of resistance tied to outdated ideas about what certain kinds of touch mean about someone. That's not biology speaking, that's social conditioning. And if you peel that away for a moment, what you're left with is just anatomy. Pure, simple anatomy. A part of the body with the capacity for pleasure. That's it. When you think about it like that, the fact that it's been ignored for so long is almost shocking, especially when you consider that prostate stimulation can, for some men, lead to more intense orgasms, multiple orgasms, or even orgasms without ejaculation at all. That's a completely different range of sensations than what most men experience in their entire lives. But here's the key. This isn't about telling men they should be into this. Pleasure isn't a checklist where you're failing if you haven't tried everything. This is about awareness. It's about knowing that there is more on the menu than you were told. And that knowledge, even if you never act on it and changes something, it gives you freedom of choice. For women, understanding the prostate isn't just about adding a new technique to the bedroom. It's about seeing your partner in a more complete way, recognizing that his pleasure isn't a straight line from point A to point B, but a landscape with different layers, routes, and hidden paths. That awareness can change the way you connect, because suddenly you're not just following a script, you're exploring a map together. And let's be honest, exploration is exciting. It takes intimacy out of autopilot. It says, there's still more to discover, even if you've been with someone for years. And the prostate, for many couples, is like finding an unopened room in a house you thought you knew every inch of. Of course, this also means approaching it with care, because if this is unfamiliar territory for someone, the experience is as much mental as it is physical. Comfort, trust, and a lack of pressure are non-negotiable. The conversation about the prostate isn't just about anatomy. It's about breaking down the fears and outdated ideas that have kept it hidden. And here's the beautiful thing. Once the fear is gone, curiosity takes over. And curiosity in relationships is where the magic happens. So, if the first step was realizing there's a silence around male pleasure, the second step is naming what's been hiding in that silence. It's been there the whole time, waiting for us to have the courage to talk about it. Do you want me to keep going and do key point 3x in the same smooth, connected flow so it feels like one continuous speech? Here's your S800 word expansion of K point 3 in the same smooth, connected style. Now, here's the question. If the prostate is this incredible source of pleasure, why is it that so few people, men and women alike, really know about it? And I don't just mean hearing the word. I mean truly understanding what it is, where it is, and what it can do in the context of intimacy. How can something so potentially game-changing stay so far off the radar? The answer has a lot less to do with biology and a lot more to do with culture. From the moment we're young, the messages we get about male sexuality are incredibly narrow. They're loud. Sure, we hear about it constantly, but they're not deep. The conversation is all surface level. It's about performance, about lasting long, about being ready anytime. It's not about nuance. It's not about discovery. It's certainly not about vulnerability. And because of that, men grow up thinking there's nothing more to learn. If all you've been told is that pleasure is a straight, predictable process from arousal to climax, you're going to assume the map is already complete. No one's handing you the secret bonus page with the hidden locations. Then, on the other side, women aren't given that map either. In sex ed, if the prostate comes up at all, it's mentioned in passing as a health concern, not as a source of pleasure. It's almost like the conversation is deliberately stripped of anything that might actually lead to curiosity. And if you look at how it's portrayed in media, if it's even mentioned, it's either a punchline or a shock moment. Never something normalized, never something that belongs in the everyday language of connection. Add to that the layers of stigma. For some men, the idea of prostate stimulation bumps up against outdated notions of masculinity. There's this old, unspoken rule. Real men don't go there. Not because of anything anatomical, but because of what the location supposedly implies about who you are. And this is where the biggest barrier lies. Not in the body, but in the mind. The fear of being judged, laughed at, or having your identity questioned keeps a lot of men from even entertaining the possibility. And let's not forget, for some women, the discomfort comes from a different place. They've simply never heard about it framed as a positive thing. Without that framing, it can seem intimidating, overly complicated, or just unnecessary. They think he's already enjoying himself. Why mess with what works? But that mindset is exactly what keeps people locked in the same loop, never discovering that there's an entire spectrum of pleasure left unexplored. It's also worth saying, sometimes the gap isn't about stigma at all. It's just pure lack of information. If you don't know something exists, you can't exactly miss it. And in relationships, it's easy to assume that if your partner wanted something, they'd just ask. But here's the catch. Most people don't ask for things they don't even know they want. If a man hasn't connected the dots between his prostate and pleasure, he's not going to bring it up, which means his partner might never even get the opportunity to explore it with him. So we end up with this strange double ignorance, men not knowing about their own anatomy in this way, women not knowing about it either, and both sides thinking, well, if this was really a thing, wouldn't I have heard about it by now? It's a perfect recipe for something to stay hidden forever. And that's exactly why the conversation matters so much. Because until we start talking about it in a straightforward, non-judgmental way, the silence will keep reinforcing itself. Every time it's avoided, it sends the subtle message. This isn't something we talk about. And the longer that message stays in place, the more intimidating it becomes to break it. When you do break it, though, everything shifts. Suddenly, there's space for curiosity. There's permission to say, I've never tried this, but I'm interested. Or even, I don't know how I feel about it yet, but I'm willing to learn. That's where the real intimacy begins. Not in the act itself, but in the openness to have that conversation without fear. Because at its core, this isn't just about one specific part of the body. It's about how we handle the unknown in relationships. Do we avoid it because it feels uncomfortable? Or do we lean into it because we know that's where growth happens? Every couple, at some point, will hit that fork in the road. And the couples that stay connected over the long term are the ones that choose curiosity over comfort. The reason women don't know about this pleasure spot isn't because they're not interested. It's because the topic has been buried under decades of incomplete education, cultural shame, and bad communication. The good news? None of that is permanent. One conversation can start to undo years of silence. One moment of vulnerability can flip the switch from. We don't talk about this. 2. We explore everything together. And that's when the door opens to the kind of connection that makes you wonder how you ever thought you knew it all. 2. Do you want me to move on and give S key point 4 as the same 800-word treatment so your speech builds perfectly into the science of pleasure? Here's your S800-word expansion for key point 4 in the same connected, conversational style. At some point, curiosity needs a little backup from science. Because it's one thing to say, the prostate can feel amazing, and it's another to understand why that's true. And when you understand the why, the hesitation starts to melt away. It's no longer this mysterious, maybe taboo idea. It becomes just another part of the body with a clear function, a clear set of nerve pathways, and a clear potential for pleasure. So let's look at it from that angle. The prostate is connected to some of the most sensitive nerve endings in the male body. Specifically, it's surrounded by the pelvic nerve network, which is linked to the same pathways that send pleasure signals from the penis to the brain. What makes it so unique is that stimulating the prostate can activate these nerves in a different way. Deeper, more internal, and in some cases, more intense than what external stimulation alone can do. If you've ever heard a man describe a prostate orgasm, it's often not just about intensity, it's about quality. People talk about it feeling fuller, more spread out through the body, sometimes lasting longer than what they're used to. And science actually supports this. Research shows that prostate stimulation can cause involuntary contractions of the pelvic floor muscles, creating a different rhythm of pleasure that doesn't always follow the same arc as a typical orgasm. In other words, it's not just a different location, it's a different experience altogether. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The prostate isn't just a pleasure center, it's also a gland with an important role in reproductive health. When it's stimulated, it releases prostatic fluid, which is a key part of semen. That means the sensations aren't happening in isolation. They're tied into the whole process of sexual release. And because the nerve pathways involved are so interconnected, stimulating the prostate can actually amplify the signals being sent from other erogenous zones. That's why some men find that combining prostate stimulation with external stimulation creates an almost overwhelming sensation in the best possible way. But there's another side to the science that's worth talking about: the relaxation factor. The prostate is surrounded by muscles that are also linked to the pelvic floor. When those muscles are tense, often from stress, poor posture, or even just sitting too much, it can restrict blood flow and reduce sensitivity in the whole area. Gentle, intentional stimulation can help relax those muscles, which not only feels good in the moment, but can also improve overall pelvic health over time. It's a side effect that most people don't even think about, but it's part of why some men describe the experience as not just pleasurable, but deeply releasing physically and emotionally. And that brings us to another fascinating point: the brain's role. We tend to think of sexual pleasure as something that happens in the body first, but in reality, it's the brain that decides how intense, pleasurable, or memorable an experience feels. Novel sensations, things you've never felt before, often light up the brain more than familiar ones. That's why exploring the prostate can feel so powerful for some men. It's not just a new sensation, it's a completely new signal pattern for the brain to interpret. And because it's unexpected, the brain often tags it as highly significant. That's part of what makes it so memorable. Of course, not every man will have the same response, and that's okay. Biology gives us the tools, but our minds and emotions shape the experience. If someone is tense, resistant, or worried about what the experience means, the brain will filter the sensation through that anxiety. That's why understanding the science matters. It strips away a lot of the unnecessary mental baggage and lets people approach it for what it really is, a part of their body that happens to be wired for pleasure. There's also the matter of technique, and science gives us clues there too. Because the prostate is an internal gland, pressure and motion matter in ways they might not with external touch. It responds to gentle, consistent stimulation, and because it's connected to the bladder and urethra, being mindful of comfort and communication is key. This is where trust between partners becomes just as important as any anatomical detail. When there's trust, the body can relax, the muscles can release, and the nerves can do what they're built to do. And that's the bridge between science and connection. Understanding the mechanics allows you to approach the experience with confidence, and confidence creates the space for deeper intimacy. It's no longer fumbling in the dark, hoping something feels good. It's intentional, it's informed, and because of that, it's far more likely to be pleasurable. Now, you might be wondering, if all of this is so clear from an anatomical and neurological perspective, why isn't it common knowledge? That takes us back to the previous point, cultural silence. The science has been there. The anatomy hasn't changed. The nerves have always been wired this way. What's been missing is the conversation. And that's the real takeaway here. Once you know how the body works, once you see the connections between anatomy, nerve pathways, and pleasure, it's hard to ignore. It's not about convincing anyone to try something they don't want to try. It's about removing the veil of mystery so they can make informed choice. Because the moment you understand that this isn't weird, it's not unnatural, it's not even unusual in the grand scheme of human anatomy, it's just another part of the body that happens to be capable of extraordinary pleasure, then the decision to explore or not explore stops being about fear and starts being about curiosity. And curiosity, backed by knowledge, is where the real breakthroughs happen. Do you want me to flow right into key point 5 hours next so the speech keeps its momentum toward communication and consent? Here's your as 100 word expansion for key point 5 in the same smooth speech like flow 2 by now. You've probably noticed a pattern. Every time we pull back the curtain on something new in intimacy, the next big step isn't physical at all. It's conversational. And when it comes to something as personal and often misunderstood as the prostate, communication and consent aren't just nice to haves, they're the foundation. Without them, all the science, curiosity, and knowledge in the world won't lead anywhere. The reason is simple pleasure, especially the kind that might feel new or unfamiliar, only thrives in an environment of safety. If someone feels like they're being pushed, pressured, or judged, or their body is going to shut down long before anything pleasurable happens, that's not psychology being dramatic. That's biology. Our brains are wired to link safety with openness. When we don't feel safe, we don't open up. It's as true emotionally as it is physically. And this is where a lot of couples miss the mark. They skip the conversation because they don't want to, or ruin the mood, or make it awkward. They assume they'll just figure it out in the moment, or worse, they make a sudden move and hope their partner goes along with it. But that's the fastest way to kill trust, not build it. Trust isn't built by surprise. It's built by clarity. A good conversation about something new in intimacy doesn't have to feel like filling out a legal form. It's not about draining the excitement out of it. It's about creating a container where excitement can actually exist without fear. That means talking about boundaries, about comfort levels, and about pacing. It means asking, is this something you'd be open to exploring? Instead of saying, we're doing this. And here's the part that really matters: listening to the answer without an agenda. If your partner says no, or I'm not ready, that's the end of the conversation for now, not the start of convincing them. Consent isn't just about permission, it's about enthusiasm. If someone is lukewarm or hesitant, that's not a yes. And trust me, nothing kills the experience faster than feeling like you're there out of obligation. On the flip side, when both people are genuinely curious, when the conversation comes from a place of, let's explore together, instead of, I need this from you, something amazing happens. The whole dynamic shifts. You're no longer two people negotiating a request. You're two people teaming up on an adventure. That's when barriers drop, because the experience stops being about one person's pleasure and starts being about shared discovery. And discovery is so much more exciting when you know you can stop at any time without disappointing the other person. That's the unspoken gift of true consent. It gives people permission to say no, which ironically makes them more likely to say yes. Why? Because they know their boundaries will be respected. That knowledge lets them relax, and relaxation is the key to pleasure. It's also worth remembering that communication isn't just about the before. It's about the during and after. If you're exploring something new, keep the feedback loop open, check in, ask how it feels, adjust based on their response. You're not just learning a technique, you're learning your partner. And afterward, talk about it. What worked? What didn't? What could be different next time? These are the conversations that turn a one-off experiment into something you actually integrate into your connection. Now, I know some people hear all this and think, that sounds like a lot of talking for something that's supposed to be spontaneous. But here's the thing. Spontaneity is wonderful, but it's not the same as recklessness. Real spontaneity can only happen when you've built a foundation of trust deep enough that anything you suggest already feels safe. When you've done the groundwork, you don't have to wonder if your partner will be open. You already know, because you've had those conversations. The irony is, the more open and communicative you are about pleasure, the more freedom you actually have to be playful and adventurous without overthinking it. You know what's welcome. You know what's off limits. You know where the boundaries are flexible and where they're not. And that knowledge is liberating. It lets you focus entirely on the experience instead of worrying in the back of your mind if you're crossing a line. The other beautiful side effect of this kind of communication is that it spills over into other parts of the relationship. If you can talk openly about something as intimate and potentially vulnerable as the prostate, you can talk about anything. It creates a precedent. In this relationship, nothing is off limits if it matters to us. That's not just about sex. That's about partnership. And maybe the most important point here is that consent and communication aren't just for the person receiving. They're for the person giving, too. Exploring something new can be just as vulnerable for the partner initiating it. They need to feel safe asking, just as much as the other person needs to feel safe responding. That's how you create an equal playing field where both people's needs matter. Because at the end of the day, pleasure isn't just about what you do. It's about how you do it and who you become in the process. The conversations you have, the trust you build, the respect you show. Those are the things that make the physical experience actually mean something. Without them, you might get the sensation, but you'll miss the connection. And connection is where the real magic is. Do you want me to go straight into key point 60s so the speech closes on the benefits beyond the bedroom with a strong finish? Here's yours 800-word expansion for key point 6, keeping it in the same natural, flowing speech tone. When we've been talking about all of this, curiosity, anatomy, communication, it's easy to think the point begins and ends in the bedroom. But the truth is, pleasure, or when approached with openness and trust, has ripple effects that go far beyond a single intimate moment. In fact, some of the most meaningful benefits of exploring something like the prostate aren't even sexual in the way we usually think of that word. They're about health, confidence, and the depth of the relationship itself. Let's start with the physical side. We already know the prostate has an important role in male reproductive health. Regular stimulation, whether sexual or through medical means, can help improve blood flow to the area, reduce fluid build-up, and in some studies, has even been linked to lowering the risk of certain prostate-related issues over time. It's not a magic bullet, and it's certainly not a replacement for medical care, but it's one of those fascinating examples where pleasure and health can actually work together. And this isn't just theory. Men who experience regular prostate stimulation often report a sense of release, not just sexually, but physically, as though tension in that part of the body has been lifted. Given that so many men deal with tight pelvic muscles from stress, poor posture, or simply long hours sitting, this kind of relaxation can make a noticeable difference. It's a reminder that our sexual health and our overall health aren't separate. They're part of the same system. Then there's the emotional side, which is arguably even more powerful. Think about what happens when a man allows himself to experience a part of his body he's been told to ignore his whole life. There's vulnerability in that. There's trust. And when that trust is met with acceptance, care, and genuine curiosity from a partner, it creates a bond that's hard to replicate anywhere else. You're not just sharing pleasure, you're sharing the willingness to be completely open with one another. That kind of openness doesn't stay locked in the bedroom. It bleeds into how you handle conflict, how you share your dreams, how you support each other's goals. Because once you've proven to each other that you can explore something as personal as this without shame or fear, everything else feels just a little easier to talk about. It's like you've built a muscle for honesty, and now you can use it anywhere. There's also a psychological boost that comes from expanding your idea of what's possible. For a lot of men, discovering the prostate as a source of pleasure is like finding out you've been listening to music in mono your whole life, and suddenly you hear it in stereo. It's not that the old way was bad. It's that you didn't know it could be richer, fuller, more layered. That realization can be addictive in the best way. It plants the seed that there's always more to learn about yourself and your partner, and that mindset is the secret to keeping intimacy alive over years, even decades. And let's not overlook confidence. When a man feels comfortable enough to explore something new and enjoys it, he starts to carry himself differently. There's an ease that comes from knowing your body better, from having expanded your range of pleasure without apology. That confidence can spill into work, friendships, and every other area of life. Because when you stop seeing curiosity as something to be embarrassed about, you stop holding yourself back in ways you didn't even realize you were. For couples, the shared benefit is obvious: more variety, and more connection, and more reasons to keep coming back to each other with fresh energy. Relationships don't stagnate because people stop loving each other. They stagnate because they stop surprising each other. They stop learning. But when you've opened the door to something as personal as this, you've essentially said, we're not done exploring. There's always going to be more. That's a powerful promise to make without even saying a word. And here's the part that's maybe the most profound once you've experienced the benefits beyond the pleasure itself. You start to realize that the prostate isn't just a spot. It's a symbol. It's a reminder of how much possibility exists in the parts of life we haven't looked at closely. How much beauty is hiding in the places we've ignored because of fear, discomfort, or simply not knowing. That's why this conversation matters so much, not just because it can lead to amazing physical sensations, but because it can change the way you relate to yourself and the person you're with. It's about proving to yourself that intimacy isn't fixed. It's something that can keep growing if you let it. And that's not just sexy. That's life-changing. Because when you step past the edge of what you've always done, you're not just finding pleasure. You're finding possibility.